actually thought you were from California.
You're not the only one. I get mistaken for California all the time because people say something like tech entrepreneur, which is also only partially true, and then they think California, and then and I think I look sort of Californian. So don't worry about it. You're not the only one. You're not the first. You will not be the last. Let's put it that way.
Do you have an introduction statement you'd like to give? And
I would love to. Thank you for inviting me to this forum. It's a fantastic opportunity. Many of you probably already know that I have a son on the autism spectrum, and I'm certainly not the first presidential candidate to have autism in my family, but I think I may be the first to talk openly about it, which to me is insane that it has taken this long for a candidate to talk about something that I think is essentially the new normal in American society. And so our son was born, we were first-time parents, and so we did not know that he was on the spectrum until he was diagnosed when he was almost 4. But for those several years, certainly there was this massive education process that was happening, and when he was diagnosed, I actually felt this massive surge of relief. I remember it vividly. I was like, oh, like fantastic, because this means that that we know what his needs may be, and we can start to work with those as opposed to fumbling in the dark, which is the way it felt as a parent. And as a first-time parent, too, you always think to yourself, maybe it's us, maybe we're just terrible at this, maybe this is perfectly normal, you just don't know. And so that education process that my wife and I went through, and I really give full credit to my wife because she was the leader in this, has led us on this journey now with our son. And to me, the fundamental tenets of my campaign, for those of you who know something about me, is that we have to rewrite the rules of the 21st century economy to work for all of us. And that includes people like my son, yes, but that includes persons who are differently abled. The fact is, right now, we have been brainwashed by this market mentality that we are the sum of whatever our current market value is according to the labor market, essentially. And I think that threatens to destroy us, not any just one group of Americans, but destroy us all, because we're in an era of unprecedented technological change that will end up making many Americans, millions of Americans, placed in the labor market more insecure in the days to come. So if we do not evolve in the way we think about ourselves and our value, then we are sunk. And you all are leaders in this because you are helping America understand its own humanity to a higher level and evolve to the place where we need to get to as soon as possible now in 2019.
Thank you. Accessible mainstream communication and information technologies, as well as assistive and adaptive technologies, often allow people with disabilities to secure and maintain employment, participate in educational activities, and experience entertainment like everyone else. The recent Domino's pizza case was a success, but many websites are not accessible at all. What steps will your administration take to address the digital divide to ensure that all people with disabilities have access to the internet, including those who rely on Social Security income supports?
This necessitates talking about our healthcare system. Where right now our healthcare system is the worst of all worlds, where we're spending all this money on things that don't necessarily improve our quality of life, don't make us stronger and healthier, is designed primarily to make money off of us, really, and not necessarily make us stronger and healthier. So when you talk about assistive technologies that certain people would benefit from, then you know what has to happen. You have to make a case to your insurance company and say, hey, I need this. And then they're like, do you really need this? And then they'll look at the fine print and then be like, oh, maybe there's a reason we can say you don't need this. And then you'll look up and say, well, can I pay for this? I mean, this is a situation that all Americans find ourselves in because of our bizarre profit and revenue-driven healthcare insurance system. So when you talk about assistive technology that helps people access entertainment or work or just enjoy a higher quality of life, we should be able to provide that through a public healthcare system, a Medicare for all system that looks up and instead of saying, hey, you have to bargain with your insurance company or you have to try and make your case to people that are not interested in helping you. They're interested in saying no to save a buck or two. I mean, that's in essence their job. The way they pay for themselves is by saying no to as many people as possible. So we need to have a healthcare system in this country that is not designed around profit or revenue, but is designed around our well-being. And then if an American who's differently abled says, hey, we need this technology tool to work, which would obviously produce massive economic value, but even if it's not to work, if it's just to be able to enjoy a higher quality of life, then our system should say, well, sure, if you need this, we should give it to you, and it should not be your sole personal financial burden to pay for this, because this is not on you. This is something that we as the most wealthy and advanced economy in the history of the world can easily afford and provide to you. So yeah, like to me, I'm very passionate about this. If someone has technology that could actually help fill that gap, then we should be giving it to them, particularly if it will make them happier and more productive.
Thank you. When the IDEA was passed in 1975, Congress pledged to finance 40% of the differential cost of serving students with disabilities. The closest the federal government has come to meeting that pledge is 19% in 2010. Higher levels of funding will ensure more students with disabilities receive the supports they need in K-12 and are able to complete high school and have an opportunity to go on to post-secondary education and post-secondary employment. Children with disabilities, especially those who are people of color, often have unequal access to educational resources despite the law guaranteeing such access.
I'm laughing because you know that like that isn't the half of it. I mean, the inequities are inhuman in terms of access to some of these resources. Go ahead.
That's okay.
No, please,
All right. Question. So what will your administration do differently? And then we have a follow-up question.
Well, first, we have to get that number to 40%, am I right? Instead of this record high of 19%? No, last I checked, I mean, if Congress commits to something, you should be able to make it happen. And this to me, I'm the child, I mean, you're laughing because it is true. I mean, like, but that's what's gone wrong. So I have a son, again, who is special needs, and he's in a special needs school. And I was talking to someone who works in autism education advocacy the other day, and she told me a story that it made you laugh and cry at the same time, but it's a story that probably would not shock you, where they went to a school district, and the school district was required to have certain resources available for differently abled children, and the administrators of the school were literally hiding from them because they did not want to have that conversation. And then she said, well, she couldn't even blame the administrators because even if they'd had the money, they couldn't hire someone with the appropriate expertise and training in that part of the country anyway, because it was in a rural part of, I believe it was Kentucky or something along these lines. And so there's such a gulf in terms of the resources available. And I'm very grateful for the fact that, really, again, thanks to my wife, like we've managed to find some excellent resources for Christopher. But we know the inequities are staggering around the country. And many of these communities, if you put it on them, then they feel like they have to rob Peter to pay Paul. You know what I mean? They're like, okay, you want me to fund the special education programs in K through 12. You know what that means? I'm going to have to cut back on this. I'm going to have to cut back on that. And to me, these are not choices we should be putting in the community's hands. This is a federal responsibility. And we can, again, easily afford it as the wealthiest and most advanced economy in the history of the world. So instead of putting communities in these impossible positions, we should be funding these instead of 40%, we should be funding them 100% and not even leave the communities in a position where they have to make these choices. And I want to say the only barrier between us funding these things 100% is really just will. The biggest lie in American life today is that we do not have the money. There are a bunch of big lies in America today, but probably the biggest lie is we don't have the money. Do you all remember voting for the $4 trillion bailout of Wall Street during the financial crisis? None of us voted for that. And do you remember anyone saying, where are we going to get the money to bail out Wall Street? I don't remember that either. You know, and so when it's time to fund the education of our children, people are like, we don't have the money. It is total nonsense. We need to call it nonsense, and we need to do much, much better.
Thank you. And now I would like to invite Gretchen Reck-Brown up, and she will be asking a question on behalf of herself and Vanya Kasuf. Both of them are deaf advocates for the deaf and hard of hearing community. So Gretchen.
Those of you who have been here all day have heard me come up here and ask this question, but I want to point out to you that even with some of the top interpreters in the state, they still have not gotten the question quite right. And this is the access issues that we face. So my question to you, the deaf community has a crisis. And the crisis is over 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents who have never met a deaf person in their lives. And so they don't know what to do with them. We have the medical establishment, and I'm not picking on the medical establishment, Dr. Cindy, but we have the medical establishment that is pushing for medical solutions rather than looking at language solutions. Our children are being deprived of language because they are not being given a language that's accessible to them. This impacts them for the rest of their lives because their mental development is dependent on acquiring language. What can we do, and what can you propose to do at the federal level to address this problem?
Well, thank you for your advocacy and for championing such a worthy cause, because I can imagine being a parent to a hearing impaired child. And I have friends who've been in this situation where you're not sure that your child has an impairment for a particular period of time, and then maybe you identify it at a particular point. And then, like you said, you're in the dark as to what to do about it. And we all know how vital something like hearing words read to you as a child is for your intellectual development. And so if you have a child who's hearing impaired, we need to find ways to let the parents know that you have to stimulate this person's development, and it may involve different methods. One of the things that and we have to explore this further, but I'm told, and some of my friends are working in this field, that there are some technological solutions for at least some elements of this. Certainly there are some people who are on the hearing impairment spectrum that you can actually, with some technology, we're actually able to now help people recover their hearing. For people who are going to be completely deaf from birth, and that's obviously not an issue, but there may be a way that we can train parents so that we can educate them and let them know that we need to help spur your child's intellectual development as soon as possible, as early as possible, in a different way than they're accustomed to from their own experience as someone who didn't have that sort of impairment. But I love your advocacy of this because it's such a real issue, and it affects kids at the earliest point, which is something I can very much relate to, because with our son, like, we were struggling very much early on, and it felt like every day counted that we figured out how to best support him. So I just appreciate you so much for championing this.
Access to affordable and reliable transportation allows people with disabilities important opportunities to go to school, work, take care of their health, live where they desire, and participate in all aspects of community life. Because our nation's investments in transportation infrastructure have disproportionately favored vehicles and highways,
Yes.
those who cannot afford vehicles or do not operate vehicles often lack viable transportation options. What sort of incentive might an administration offer a car manufacturer which expressed an interest in expanding upon the concept of renovating cars to make them handicap drivable?
I love this question. It's really profound. I'm a huge fan of public transportation. I'm a train guy. If you go to other parts of the world, you see what trains can be. And then you come back to the United States and you're like, what are we doing? Oh, really? But this is an area where technology can help. I would put federal incentives behind retrofitting some of these vehicles to be more accessible to people who are differently abled. But we can go much, much bigger than that over time. Mobility is set for a revolution. Can you imagine being in your home and then just having like an autonomous vehicle come that's equipped for you that can then help you gain access to this car and then bring you wherever you want and then wait for you all day and then take you home on command? All of these things are much more feasible today than they were at any point in time, and they are right around the corner. Now, my campaign, you all know, is built around the fact that some of these changes will be disastrous for many, many Americans, because driving a truck, as one example, is the most common job in 29 states. So if you have autonomous trucks, that is going to devastate many, many regional economies and households from people that make their living driving a truck. But there are many profound revolutionary benefits for this too, where you can have a self-driving electric car that essentially comes to you on command. It can be fitted for you, and then it can help spirit you to wherever you'd like to go, whether that's for work or play or to visit a family member. It can restore a degree of independence and mobility to Americans that right now are struggling to enjoy that. And we are seeing this right now in certain assisted living communities. I have friends in Silicon Valley who they're working on these self-driving electric cars that are a little bit like golf carts. Their max speed might be like 20 miles an hour. They're not like Ferraris, they're not going to like take you on a joyride. But one of the biggest use cases that they have is assisted living communities that are a bit more expansive, and just to be able to get a couple of miles, they have these robot electric golf carts that just take people places. So there are some incredible things that are around the corner. We can think much, much bigger than retrofitting cars for people who are differently abled. Like there's a revolution around the corner that could make us all much more mobile in the real world.
Thank you. And at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Cindy Hanawalt, who is the immediate past president of the Lynn County Medical Society.
Hello.
Hello, how are you? I know, I'll just sit on the edge. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for coming. We'll switch the gears a little bit and talk a little more about healthcare and some concerns that we have directly related to physicians. As you know, the U.S. spends more on healthcare than any other country, with costs approaching 18% of the gross national product.
Yep.
A recent article in the Journal of American Medicine estimated that more than 30% of U.S. healthcare spending may be considered waste. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what is contributing to this 30% of waste and how you would deal with trying to decrease that percent.
I think 30% is a low estimate. I think the waste is higher. I have a friend who's a brilliant financial analyst. She's like one of the smartest people with numbers that I know. And she says that she has never seen profiteering and price gouging at the same levels as she does in the healthcare industry with device manufacturers, drug companies, and private insurers. So I would be very interested to see whether that 30% waste figure includes the mammoth profit margins that these companies are all taking home. The way that we try and decrease this waste is by aligning the incentives of our providers with us. And that's a very mammoth task. It's easy to say, hard to do. So one of the examples I like to cite is that in a situation where physicians don't actually make more money based upon doing more procedures or prescribing things, then they do fewer procedures and they prescribe less. And it turns out that those physicians' patients are just as healthy or even healthier than when you have physicians that have the profit motivation. And physicians have another motivation too that is not their fault. They're afraid of getting sued. When you talk about the waste in the system, a lot of it is like, well, let's see, if I order this test, do I think the patient needs the test? Debatable. But if I order the test, I can't be sued. And then you're like, well, I guess I'm going to order the test. So you have extra tests, and you multiply that times millions of patients, you end up with a lot of money. This 18% of GDP, I mean, that's almost $4 trillion. This is another frustration I have when people are like, how are you going to pay for health care? So much of it right now is that we need to wring the excesses out of the system. This is a situation where it's not like the money is actually making us stronger and healthier. The money is just making the device company shareholders, the drug company shareholders, and the private insurance company shareholders wealthier. We need to just fundamentally change the incentives of our healthcare system so that they're making decisions based upon our well-being and healthfulness and not maximal profit and revenue. If that decision-making process changed, then this waste you're talking about would go way, way down, because clinicians would be making decisions based upon what was best for us and not what's best for their bottom line or what's best for their legal liability.
Thank you. So the next line of questioning has to do with physician burden. Physicians are reporting more burnout today than ever before. Reasons for burnout and discontentment among clinicians are many and include increased paperwork and upkeeping of electronic records due to regulations and compliance issues that add more time and cost but do not add to increased reimbursement and do not strengthen the patient-physician relationship or improve quality of care. How do you propose to assist healthcare professionals in avoiding burnout?
First, let me just say, I'm a super fan of yours already, Dr. Hanawalt. These questions, I want to do it to a board member. Let's give her a round of applause. I have a feeling you know. And I just love these questions so much because it's clear that Dr. Hanawalt is trying to reform the problems in the system. So I told a joke that I got some heat from, but I'm Asian, so I know a lot of doctors. And there are all of these problems with the way that we're training doctors and their incentives that are leading to burnout. So number one, why is there such a massive doctor shortage in this country? Is it because there's a shortage of young people who want to become doctors? Of course not. It's because we have this artificial supply constraint on doctors from the AMA that say, hey, we're going to make it super expensive to educate a doctor, and we're going to make the number essentially the same. So the first thing you do is you try and expand the pool of doctors in the market. The second thing you'd say is why are we making it so expensive for the individual in medical school? It ends up changing their choices fundamentally. I have many friends who went into medical school who wanted to be family doctors. Then you load them up with $200,000 in school loans, and they start looking around and being like, maybe I should become a dermatologist. Maybe I should become an anesthesiologist. And what happens then? Then they go to big coastal markets and cities where they can get paid more money so they can try and pay down the $200K in loans. So number one, create more slots for our doctors. Number two, don't load them up with this crazy debt. Or if you do load them up with the crazy debt, say, hey, if you choose a field that benefits the public, then we should forgive your debt to make it cancel out. The third thing is we have to loosen up these crazy licensing requirements that right now the doctors are struggling with. Does the human anatomy change across state lines? If I drive 4 hours north as a Minnesotan, I need to get a different license to practice medicine on this person. But that is actually the way our system works right now. I talked to a telemedicine doctor who had to get licensed in all 50 states, and I was like, are you kidding me? And I asked him about the test, and I was like, how different were they from each other? And he was like, there's this much difference in each one, just enough to justify its existence. So you have, but the fundamental reason why doctors are burnt out is what you just said, Dr. Hanawalt, which is we load them up with paperwork, and then we send them into a system where they essentially, instead of being a highly paid empathetic professional, they turn into an assembly line worker. And then they get paid based upon the number of patients seen, and they have to become these hyper-efficient machines. And then they have to do all this paperwork afterwards that ends up consuming 30-40% of their time. This is why physicians are retiring, and unfortunately it turns physicians who went into the field with the best of intentions, many of them into these less empathetic, machine-like doctors, as opposed to the human doctors that we want for ourselves. So there are a lot of steps we would take, but I could not agree with you more that burnout among clinicians is a huge factor. Another thing I would say is we should loosen up, you might disagree with this, we should loosen up the licensing requirements, not just across state lines, but in areas that are primary care desert, which is unfortunately now 30% of the country. We should try and empower nurse practitioners and physician's assistants and other forms of clinicians to be able to address basic health issues, refer them to an MD if you need to, but with greater flexibility, and in some cases, diagnostic technologies, we'd be able to improve people's health access if we loosened up the licensing requirements that the AMA has fought at every stage, once again as a means to retain their control of the industry.
I'm going to have just a second for the dialogue. I think we're in agreement of that. There's certainly not enough providers at this point. And, you know, there's a little bit of turf fighting sometimes saying, well, you didn't go to medical school and, you know, you weren't up all night and you didn't go through all the vigor. But part of that is medical decision making. And I think that what we're looking for providing quality healthcare is working as a team and trying to get in collaboration of that. And it's not necessarily saying, you know, that the buzzwords now is like, you know, stay in your lane. You can't do this, you can't do that. But I think we have to have a system where we can all practice together to make sure that we have quality delivery, because if you just allow certain practitioners to start prescribing medicines without the fundamental background, we're going to see more comorbidities and more mortality associated with that. So we definitely need more access to care, we need more providers, but we still need to maintain that quality. And to maintain that quality is not me checking extra boxes in some EMR so I can get reimbursed for the work that I do. And so as we talk to you, and we really appreciate you being here today to hear our voices, is that we're not trying to make more money as physicians. We're just trying to do what we do best and to do it in a way that keeps us doing it so our suicide rate doesn't go up.
And we have to free you to do your jobs and do your best and look out for us. We have to unshackle you from this crazy system that we've chained you into. So I couldn't agree more. I have many friends who are doctors, and I want to free them up. And you know, I mean, everything you say I'm a huge fan of. I mean, the collaborative medicine and trying to practice in teams would be the ideal.
Great, thank you. All right, well, I want to thank you for coming. We'd like to give you the opportunity for some closing remarks.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. It's been tremendous. I've enjoyed the heck out of it. And thank you also for sticking around, because I think I'm your last candidate. The passion and humanity that animates this event and this community, I believe, is the same passion and humanity that is animating my campaign. Right now, Americans have been brainwashed into confusing economic value and human value. And I will say, even in this community, there's a trap for you all. And the trap is this, where you say that the trap is to say that persons who are differently abled are just as capable of contributing economically in the workplace as people who are neurotypical or non-disabled. And that is 100% true in many contexts, but also it doesn't matter. I mean, if you get stuck arguing from the market perspective, then you're unfortunately falling into the trap of saying that our economic value and our value as human beings are the same things. And so many Americans right now have been brainwashed into that, and it threatens to tear us apart as a country. And so at the macro level, what I say is, like, look, we're at a point in our technological progress where an artificial intelligence program can see the tumors more accurately than the most highly trained human radiologist, because the AI can see shades of gray that the human cannot. This is no longer about, oh, are you smart or hardworking or good at your job or not? Like, this is about how we value ourselves as human beings independent of the marketplace, because technology is now upending many of the things that we've taken for granted for a long time. You all are leading the charge in helping make us more human. And that is the challenge, unfortunately, of this time, is to humanize our economy, to rewrite the rules of the 21st century economy to work for us, the people of this country. We need to unlock our fellow Americans from this confusion. Say that we have value independent of anything the market is saying, and we should be solving the real problems of this time, which includes how to make ourselves happier, healthier, mentally healthier, our environment cleaner and healthier, our children stronger and healthier. These are the real problems of this time. If we see ourselves as inputs into the capital machine, we all will lose on an epic scale. And we can do much, much better than that. And you all are proof of that. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm very sorry for misspeaking earlier.
Again, I take it as a compliment.
Okay, so before he leaves the stage, and everybody does this mass thing, there's a mass thing that goes on. It has nothing to do with church. So a couple of announcements. Number one, we're going to do 15-minute meet and mingle, but